Hello, everyone. So my name is Dimitri Tito, and I'm the chairperson of the AOGME Residents and Fellows Council. So welcome to our webinar on the residency interviewing tips for the match part 2. If you were with us for part 1, welcome back. So happy to see you. So we thank you for each of you. We thank you for your time, and we also thank the residents that are with us today to answer some of your questions. And Alenta with AOGME is also joining us. So just a couple of things about what RFC does. So RFC, the Resident and Fellow Council is within the AACOM's Assembly of Osteopathic Graduate Medical Educators. And it was established in 2018 to develop future leaders of the osteopathic profession. So, many of you are future leaders. So what we do, we create a leadership track for residents and fellows, as well as multiple educational activities, for the osteopathic residents. We also provide support. We also provide resources on critical issues in the osteopathic profession. We have mentors for student leaders, some of you, and networking opportunities for our RFC members. So if you're a fourth year medical student, so please join us. We're going to drop our email so you could let us know if you have any questions. And we would love to have you next year. You can also visit the website and the AACOMS.org/RFC to learn about what we do, our events, our webinars, our meetings. So, well, this is very informal, all right? So right now, I would like to invite the resident speakers to introduce themselves. I know we have Linda, Maria, Alisa, and Mustafa. And we have a couple of residents that will be joining us as well. They're busy, they're busy working, but they'll be able to join us. So we have a good team. So for all the speakers, for all the resident speakers, if you don't mind, could you tell us where you're from and grew up, where you did your medical school, where you going for residency along with your specialty, and what are you having for dessert? The most important question. And the last one, what did you put in the hobby section of your ERAS application? So and again, your name, where you from, where you grew up, what medical school you went to, what residency you're going right now with your specialty, what are you having for dessert, as well as what did you put for the hobby section of your ERAS application? All right, so I'm going to start with Linda.
Hello, my name is Linda Logan. I am from Salt Lake City, Utah. I went to medical school in West Virginia at West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine in Lewisburg. I am now in residency at Burlington, Vermont, in pathology and laboratory medicine. And I'm having ice cream for dessert. And my ERAS application was jam-packed with hobbies. Most notably that I got asked about a bunch was playing fetch with my 2 cats.
All right, let's go with Mustafa.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Mustafa Basri. I am from Columbus, Ohio, and currently in Columbus, Ohio, I am completing a transitional year at Riverside Methodist. I'm going into radiation oncology in Madison, Wisconsin. So I interviewed virtually last year, both for the transitional year or prelim med and the radiation oncology program. So I'm happy to talk about those two. Let's see what else are we doing. What are you having for dessert? I already had my ice cream. I'm sorry, I couldn't wait. What did you put in the hobbies section? So I put, like Linda, a bunch of stuff, but mostly things that portray kind of what I would like the residency program to know about me. So I put soccer, I put cooking Iraqi food. I'm originally from Iraq. I put discovering new hiking trails, and then reading, and I put specifically narrative medicine and nonfiction literature, playing the guitar. And I got asked just about, every interview asked me about cooking Iraqi food and the soccer. So that was fun. Looking forward to talk to you all.
All right, Maria, and take it away.
Hey guys, I'm Maria. I'm originally from Maryland, but I went to medical school at the University of New England in Maine. And I'm back down in the Mid-Atlantic in Delaware at Christiana here for residency. I'm a PGY1 in the emergency medicine, internal medicine combined program here. So I virtually applied like Mustafa, and I did emergency medicine and internal medicine and combined, so I can address any of those types of questions if anyone has them. I am eating leftover peach cobbler for dessert. I'm on nights right now, so it's like kind of breakfast time, kind of dessert time for me, but I mean, all time of day is dessert time, which is appropriate. And for the ERAS hobby section, I feel like this is like the most underrated section of the entire application because every single one of my interviewers brought up one of my hobbies at some point. And I wasn't as like, I guess, professional or well-spoken as Mustafa. I did like weird things like amateur flash mob choreographer because like I've choreographed some flash mobs in my life. And I like taught Zumba. So I talked about Zumba. I like sold snow cones off a boat for a summer. So I was like entrepreneurs with the snow cone business and like made them like kind of like quirky and vague. So people were always like, tell me more about this like bizarro thing you said, which always was like fun and kind of broke the ice. But also I tried to use it to show like my personality a little bit outside of just like my ERAS like tasks and requirements.
That's awesome, Maria. I agree with you. So don't underestimate that section, all right? They're gonna read that section. They want to make sure that you know you're compatible with your residents, you know, that you do something for fun. That's important. All right, Alisa, go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Elisa Pham. I am a PGY1 family medicine resident at Ohio with the Wright Center. And I'm from Texas, that's where I went undergrad. But I've lived in Michigan and Louisiana, moved around growing up. My medical school is in Arkansas College of Osteopathic Medicine. And let's see, my hobbies, on my ERAS, I listed a lot. I think the few that I remember are on my top list where I like to hike, cook, explore, travel, paint, and exercise. I mean, pretty generic list, but that's what I like to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, after all, you want to be honest, you know, so if you like to exercise or read a book, you know, just you go ahead and just put it down. So, well, I know we have Allison, Daniel, and Jeremy that may join us. I don't see them here now, but might be able to see them later on. All right, well, I'll go ahead. So my name is Dimitri Chito, and originally born in Cameroon. I grew up in Maryland, just like Maria. We're actually from this very same neighborhood in Maryland, so in Montgomery County. And I went to medical school at the West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine. So Linda and I were actually, study buddies. So we used to study together for exams. And right now I'm doing my residency. I'm a second year in the internal medicine program at the Western Michigan University School of Medicine. So, and I'm having a French style cheesecake mousse. So it's very French, I like the French cuisine. So that's what I'm having for dessert. And for hobby section, I figured that, I like playing video games. So I wasn't sure if I needed to put that in my in my ERAS. So so I put soccer because I also play soccer. So I'm actually in the soccer league here in the community. We have a soccer league that we do. So I enjoyed that. So I put that in my ERAS. And I also enjoy robotics. So I did engineering in undergrad. So I helped my cousins and my nephew with their projects, the hovercraft projects. So I do a lot of the robotic stuff. So I enjoyed. All right. So next, so why don't we share? Why don't we share with the applicants some tips that we learned from interviews? All right. So for each one of you resident speakers, could you provide 3 tips on virtual interviewing or interviewing in general that you wish you knew before interviews? All right, well, let's go ahead and start with Mustafa.
Thank you, Dimitri. I guess I'll get started. All right, so three tips. So personally, I think practice. So number 1 will be practice, practice, practice. Number 2, keep your answers direct, specific, and short. And 3, just tips about equipment. So number 1 is practice, practice, practice. Practice, telling a little bit about yourself. Practice telling a little bit of why the field you're going into. And try to rehearse it in a way that it does not sound rehearsed. But more genuine and include some of, hand motion, maybe some emotion, something. But just try to practice so that you're not stumbling on questions, at least the most common questions. Also, keep the answers direct, specific, and short. Ideally, at least me personally, I kept my answers 1 to 1.5 minutes. Although some questions may require a little bit more thoughtful, longer answers, which is fine. But just general composition of an answer, if you will, is to provide a little bit of background, give a little bit of story, what you learned from the story, and what you're going to bring to the program, if you can. This way, your answers are focused, are focused on not just addressing the question itself, but also how it relates to you, what you learned, and how it relates to the program. And then lastly, equipment. I did not spend a lot of money on equipment. The most expensive thing I bought was this camera, which I think I really like it. But it was about 30 or 40 bucks from Amazon. That's it. You don't have to spend, exuberant amount of money on cameras because Zoom has a specific limit of frames per second. So regardless of how expensive the camera is, it will just not transmit that high of a quality. And then in terms of headphones or, speakers or mics, I've seen everything when I was interviewing last year. So, you can go from this to, overhead Bluetooth wireless headphones. They'll be fine. And when the internet goes off, which sometimes it will, and it'll go down, you'll just get a call. You either FaceTime or you just have a phone call, like, all times. It'll be fine. It'll be great. You guys will do great.
Nice. So if you have a background just like mine, that's fine, right, Mustafa?
Yes. Not like mine. Mine's a little bit messy. This is the guest room. But if you have something like Dimitri's, that's perfectly fine.
So no need to add, get an expensive camera or add stuff in your background for your interview. All right. So Linda, you want to share with us some tips on your virtual interviewing or interviewing in general?
Sure. So I didn't interview virtually, but I've done a lot of like meeting future residents virtually. So I've at least got to see kind of how people set everything up. And I'd agree with everything Mustafa said. For me, in-person interviews, I think it was just important to be yourself because then, you'll see if you really do fit in with the culture there. You don't want to try to be someone you're not. It'll be a miserable 3 years. I would say to look presentable. You don't have to be, full of makeup or anything, but I think it is important to buy maybe like a nice suit coat or something for your interview. It does show that you went the extra mile. And although looks aren't, everything, it does look nice when you get, dressed up. And then thirdly, I agree with Mustafa in the sense of, make sure you're answering the question that's asked to you. It's easy to go on tangents. But at the end of the day, clear and concise and just answering what they're kind of seeking is the best thing to do and not overshare.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree with those. Thank you, Linda. Well, Alisa, anything else to add?
I agree with all that's already been said. A few things I like to add is I had virtual interviews last year. The first one would be know your personal statement really well. They can ask you specific details about your personal statement and what one sentence and they'll ask you to go into detail and give examples about that. Other tips would be for virtual interviews, most programs will offer social events prior to the interview. So make sure you sign up for those social events. They're typically virtual too, and that kind of lets the residents get to know you prior to the interview. And you may not even meet all the residents during interview day. So you get to know more about other members of the program at the social events. And some programs also have follow-up Zoom call events towards the end of the interview cycle. And if you're really interested in the program or just want to have a greater opportunity to learn more about the program, participate and sign up for those end of the interview season follow-up events for each program. So I think any Zoom meeting with a residency program, whether they're residents and or program directors, I think would be helpful for you.
Yeah, I agree with Alisa, and I had very similar feedback as well. So let's go with Maria. I know she also had virtual interviewing last year or this year.
Yeah, I did. Thanks. So I agree with everything that everyone's already said. I think they took a lot of the really strong, big hitting points. A couple things that I would also add is be engaging, kind of like what's kind of already been said, but being on Zoom and being virtual, it's kind of easy to feel less engaged. So trying to like look at the camera opposed to scanning the screen. If there's multiple people, that can look like you're being distracted and you're reading something even though you're actually looking at the person. So that's something like when you're practicing, or if you do a Zoom call with someone as like a practice ahead of time, practice like looking at the camera, pretending like it's their face. Other thing going along with practice, every single interview asked me, tell me about yourself in some way. Sometimes I had like 4 different interviewers and each single person started with tell me about yourself. So that's a question that I would definitely have a prepared answer for, kind of like what Mustafa was saying with the, a little bit of background, kind of a story, kind of what you learned from it. It's a similar format of like where you came from, kind of what you did in medical school and how that like led to the specialty you want. And then I would always close with like, and I'm really excited to be here talking to you about whatever program. So just like a succinct like 60-second blurb that you can kind of keep fresh when you're asked that, and it definitely will come to good use throughout the course of the interview season. And then my third tip is have questions prepared, which I know sounds like obvious, but not only just have them prepared, but if there's a part of your application that you feel like you might not get asked about, that you want to bring up or highlight, like tie that into a question. So I was really involved with leadership in medical school. And so I would always like start with saying I was really involved with leadership and advocacy in medical school. And that's something I really hope to continue in residency. Can you tell me about the opportunities that your program offers to residents for that involvement? So it like kind of slyly is like, hi, I also did things if you want to ask me more, but also like genuinely, I do want to stay involved. Can you tell me about that? So asking questions that allow you to still highlight yourself, but also give you a connection to the program and give you information on the program.
Thank you, Maria. And I would say exactly what they say. We all still practice. So I did practice. I remember talking to myself before the interviews, like I gotta make, just have a nice flow when you've been asked a question. So even difficult questions like a gap in your education, maybe there was a gap between 2nd and 3rd year, or a lower complex score, or a lower grade in one of your classes. So just, because you're going to be asked those questions. So just have an answer ready, an honest answer ready, for the program directors. So take notes as well during your interview. So I know you're going to have multiple interviews. Some of you maybe 16 interviews. So take positive notes, negative notes, questions that you have, so you could, get back to it, because you'll get busy. And like I think Mustafa said that as well, even Alisa, get to meet your residents, so if we love to see the new interns. We want to get to know, we want to get to know them. We want someone that it will be easier for us to interact and be on the same page and have fun together, because it's going to be a long 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, depending where you go. So all right, well, so I will do, so Maria, could you go over some questions that were asked by the applicants I know that many of you submitted questions earlier. So we'll go ahead and start by answering those questions, and then we'll start taking questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to put in the chat bar, and then we'll be happy to answer those. Maria, take it away.
Sounds good, thanks. So we got a lot of great questions submitted ahead of time, and I know there were some leftover questions from the webinar last Monday as well. So we've kind of gone through those and tried to clump them together and address as many as possible. So I'll just pose a couple of those to our group of wonderful resident panelists right now. So starting off, a lot of you were concerned and intrigued by preparing for interviews. I know we touched on that a little bit so far, but to the group, how do you think is the best way to prepare for interviews?
Bullet points. Start off with bullet points of your ideas for this particular questions. Like, tell me about yourself. Just list bullet points, and then talk to yourself in the mirror, talk to your best friend, your sister, and describe who you are to them, and they can give you input on how to improve it or how to sound more natural. But you don't have to type out complete sentences of exactly what you're going to say. Just know how you want to say within that 60-second time frame.
Yeah, I agree. I know many medical schools have mentors. If you have a mentor in medical school, or have mock interviews that you could do in your medical school, please do that as well. That will help. I think I've done that while I was applying. So.
Yeah, I would agree with what Alyssa said, because you can talk, on and on about a specific question, for example, or you may not be able to talk at all because it's uncomfortable about yourself. But listing talking points, if you will, that will be really important when you formulate your answer, because one, it will not sound as rehearsed because you have points that you want to hit, not necessarily you're memorizing a paragraph. And so say, for example, for me, I want to talk about my background. So so-and-so, I came from, so-and-so place. I went undergrad here. I did that while there. This is how I discovered radiation oncology. And this is why I applied to this program. And I'm really excited to be here. Boom, boom, boom. All the things that I wanted to highlight. But the answer itself is not identical from one program to another. And having that flexibility is important because it gives it a little bit more of a spontaneity, if you will. And also, it's perfectly okay to feel anxious and nervous and somewhat unprepared, even though you're preparing a lot for these interviews. If you come across a question that's hard or difficult, or you just don't know how to answer, it's okay to say, that's. I haven't thought about this, but this is how I would approach the situation, especially if they ask you situational questions. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, well, that's interesting. This is how I would approach this problem. Yeah.
I would like to add that there is a sense of learning as you interview. A lot of fellow residents I've talked to have also agreed that it gets a little bit easier as you've done a few. So your first one kind of feels scary. It seems kind of hard, but when you're by, your 8th, 10th, whatever time, you're all of a sudden this natural. So there's kind of a learning curve in it in this, a little bit as well. So you're not going to have all the answers and you're not going to be a natural immediately. But once you do a few, you'll kind of get the hang of it. And then you'll kind of have, like they've all said, rehearse things to say, or you've heard it before, so you're not kind of caught off guard. But I do think it gets easier with time.
I think that flows really well into the next question that people were curious about. So in general, how were the interview days structured? I guess this will be more so for us who did virtual interviews for this upcoming year, but how were they structured, and were there always social hours or happy hours before, during, or after?
So for me, it was kind of a combination. I applied to schools basically, or programs from Boston to California, the ones that I was looking at. So sometimes the interviews were in the morning, sometimes were at night, sometimes mid-afternoon, between around noontime. So really, it changed, and every program was different. I interviewed at some programs that had 2 interview sessions, and they would give you the option of either interviewing in the morning versus, in the afternoon. In terms of happy hours, that also was really, it was different. It was program specific. Some people have done it the night before. Some people have done it after. Some people have done it like a weekend when things were not as crazy during the week. Also, they will send you goodie bags. I got some goodie bags and I was really excited about that. Some may not. So just to keep, if you don't get a goodie bag, it's okay.
I'll just say I think it really depends on where you're interviewing at. So some programs, like my program, I didn't interview virtually, but I was involved with the interviewing of our new interns, and we didn't have a social hour the night before or that day. We just kind of talked with the residents interview throughout the day. So I think it really, really depends on each individual program that you're going to apply to. Every single one of them is going to be different, but expect multiple interviews, like small sessions. You may have even like little group sessions with a couple of attendings, a couple of residents, but it's really going to vary.
Yeah, I will say, just like for general structure, there was usually some kind of intro session with the program. Either the program director led it or residents led it. And then usually there were a couple interviews that were one-on-one or like 2-on-1. And it was typical conversation. And as far as, from my perspective, as far as the actual structure of the interview itself, that interaction via Zoom, mind you, it was like way less fun and like kind of difficult via computer. But I think the information that I wanted to get across on an interview was just as easily done via Zoom as it could have been in person for the interview interface itself. The getting to the program and everything, it was not as easy on Zoom, but the talking was in my opinion. All righty. So then speaking of being on Zoom and being on camera, how do you guys suggest, or what are some tips that you have for being present and engaging in a virtual platform without just staring at the little person's picture in the box?
I guess I can say kind of how I do it with our didactics: head nodding, smiling, your typical emotions without words are just as, understood through virtual encounters as you are in person. So if you're just going to sit like, this, it's weird. So if you're just kind of your normal self and you show your emotions the same way as you would in person, it feels a lot more natural. So I think good posture is important, but you don't want to be too stark and too stiff.
Yeah, I agree with Linda. Just be yourself. I think as long as you ask a couple questions and participate in the conversation, and then try to smile, make some hand gestures, just like you were talking to someone, I would think it may be a little easier for some people to do virtual, but again, it just depends on the person as well.
Sounds good. As far as questions that you ask programs, what are some critical questions that you guys think should be asked of every program, or that you felt were helpful to ask every program?
For me, so I want to do FMOB. So it was really important. So if you're interested in any kind of thing with like procedures, then you need to ask about like procedure numbers and if anybody has any problems meeting those procedure numbers. So for me, I was asking about like vaginal delivery, C-section, stuff like that. But yeah, make sure make sure you're getting what you want to get out of it.
Yeah, I agree with Allison. So if you want to do fellowship, you could ask about those. You could ask questions regarding, how many residents match into fellowship, but try not to ask about questions that have answers on the website, because because that would just mean that you did not do your research. So try to come up with questions that are based on yourself, just be honest to yourself and what you want to do after residency. Like questions like, how many residents end up staying in the hospital after they graduate? That could be a good question. But again, just come up with your own questions that will satisfy you.
During my interview last season, I like to ask, what do you think are your strengths and weaknesses of the program, or how do you think your program has improved or changed over the past couple of years? Are there any major changes in the program that you've made? Just to see if they're open to changes or if their dynamic environment is static. Like, are they open to suggestions from residents or other attendings if they are dynamic in how they want to improve as a residency as a whole? So those are questions I kind of ask to gain and just to assess how flexible the program is and what they're open to do.
I was personally interested in research, so I looked at people, who was interviewing me, and maybe not just research. So just look at who is interviewing you and try to look them up, Google them. Sometimes you can go on PubMed and see what they published to get an idea of what they're interested in. For me personally, I was interested in research, so that was the first, stop for me, and that generated a lot of questions, not just about their research, but also, some people were doing educational research, some people were doing palliative care and kind of advanced care planning type work, which that's something that I'm interested in. So just from going to PubMed and researching the person who's interviewing you, you'll come up with 1 to 2 questions that you can ask them that would be very personalized and very specific to that person.
That's awesome. A couple things that I always asked. My biggest, hurdle in virtual interviewing was like really trying to get a feel for the programs. So something that I always tried to ask was, how often do you see your co-residents outside of the hospital? Because a lot of programs will have like social events like monthly, but like they're so busy in the hospital that like 2 residents show up. So seeing like how many times they're actually all able to like kind of get together or have time to coalesce like outside shows like if they like each other and if they like have enough of like a work-life balance to do similar things like that. And then something else that I always tried to ask was how the hospital managed COVID, and just like keeping it kind of open, or like asking the residents how they felt if they were supported during COVID, or program directors like how they tackled the hurdles of COVID and how they're continuing to do that, which really allowed me to kind of see how they manage PPE and like different like downtime if like residents were calling out sick or things like that, which I thought was really helpful, especially in the unfortunate circumstances that we're in today. So regarding, I know Dimitri mentioned it a little bit earlier, taking notes during the virtual interview process. How did you guys handle taking notes? Did you write them on paper? Did you type them on the computer? Did you feel like it looked positively or negatively upon if you were taking notes during the interview? Kind of just if you could talk about your note-taking experiences.
Oh, I actually forgot. So, so my plan, so initially I was taking a couple notes, but I wasn't very consistent. And I wish, I've done a better job, because when it comes to ranking, I didn't quite remember, which program was better for me. So I ended up asking, the residents, hey, here are some questions I have. Would you answer those for me? But I definitely recommend to do that. If I could go back, that's something I would have done a better job at.
So I personally took go. Okay. So personally, what I did, I took notes usually after the interview to kind of general feel. I had a spreadsheet, so I can talk about this later, but I have a spreadsheet with all programs and specific things that I look for at every program. And I would write a little blurb, 1 sentence, 2 sentences, how I felt overall. But then and that's after the interview. If someone is saying something and I think that, oh, this is interesting, I don't want to forget about it, so I'm going to follow up when they finish this up, then I just write it down on like a piece of paper. So I did have a notebook with me with a pen. I did not type on the computer because that looks a little bit distracting, especially because it's all online. And so if you're like moving your eyes and typing and you have your shoulders up, it looks like you're not really paying attention. And then lastly, because it's all virtual, if someone is giving a presentation and they have their PowerPoint slide, all you have to do is just take a screenshot. You don't have to take any notes. And if it's something that's really important that you, again, want to ask or follow up on after the lecture, then you can just jot it down real quick.
He did exactly what I did. I was going to say, I took a few, notes at the end, and then I made a huge Excel spreadsheet, which I think is super helpful, putting vacation days, health insurance. We forget about all these things until you start residency, other amenities, call days, all that stuff in a spreadsheet. But I would say just to kind of echo what Mustafa said, be careful with over taking notes, because in person, at least when I interviewed with a few people who took like notes the whole time, it was very distracting. You definitely want like a balance, because you're going to remember the experience more than you think.
I'm just going to throw this plug in there too. Your med schools might talk about it, but there's the Prism app, I think is what it was called. I don't know if any of you guys remember that. So it was through ERAS. You can download it on any smartphone. I'm pretty sure it's called Prism. And you can input, like they have all of the programs inputted by specialty, and they have like, you can rank them by points. So then it just gives you like a buildup of points for each program, so that you can kind of use that to help yourself rank places, whether you really like them or not. So I use that, and it like, I knew where I wanted to go to begin with, but then whenever I started putting in points about what I thought about places, it was just kind of reassuring. It's like, oh yeah, no wonder I'm ranking that place high.
I'm so jealous I didn't know about that app until just now. That would have been super helpful. So everyone should use that. Alrighty, just kind of rounding off the questions that were submitted ahead of time. Looking then to after the interview, people have been wondering about post-interview tips, and on top of tips you have for follow-up from the interviews, do you guys recommend sending letters of interest before or after interviews, and then thank you notes after interviews? How did you handle post-interview communication?
I like to send out thank you follow-up emails to the program directors or any interviewers I had.
So in radiation oncology, generally speaking, it's frowned upon to say thank you after interviews. There is this general no post-interview communication. Of course, if you have questions, then obviously you should ask that question. But some programs will specifically say during the interview, do not send me thank you cards. I know you all appreciate me for being here and all of that. So I did not necessarily send red onc thank you notes for my prelim, because they did not specifically ask it in the general culture is that if you like a program, you send thank you. I contacted my top 2 programs and I told them that I'm going to rank them highly, essentially.
I agree with Mustafa. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as writing a letter and sending it in the mail. I would say though, your program coordinators, with all your interviews, if you respond to them at the very end with an email thanking them for like, this was when it was in person, but they'd arrange you for dinner, they'd arrange to meet you for, before they did all these things. And so I'd always make sure to thank them, because they really were like the face of the program. I thanked the directors via email, but I didn't tell them I wanted to go there. I just thanked them for their time and said it was a pleasant experience. Only one director where I am. I did write that I was heavily considering them, but I never stated they were my number one. I think that that's frowned upon. And as whoever attended the Monday session last week, I think it was like was it Dr. Cook? I can't remember who said it, but they said, don't tell someone they're your number one unless you actually mean it, because they've been burned before and it offends people. It makes them feel, bad. So be careful with overthinking people and kind of talking them up.
If you do send a thank you email, make sure whoever you send it to include a specific blurb about a conversation you both had. So you two can remember that you had an interview together, and he can remember you with the email, because there's so many emails that program directors or associate program directors will get. So if you remember a specific detail of a conversation you had together, it'll give you high marks, I guess. It makes you more memorable.
I agree. And then we had similar questions during our part 1 webinar last week. And the program directors, they did say that it doesn't necessarily affect your ranking if you send a thank you email. So you do not have to send a thank you emails. Matter of fact, I remember asking some program coordinators if it was okay to send thank you emails. Some of them were like, sure, you could do it. Some of them, if you want, and some of them told me, no, you do not want thank you email. So it just depends. So you could ask if you're not sure, but don't feel the need to send it.
And a lot of the programs, from my experience, will say one way or another. Like at the end in the closing statement, the PD will be like, please don't send us thank you emails. We get too many emails. We don't want them. Or they'll say, you can send it if you want. Really won't affect anything. Like Mustafa said, we know you're grateful for being here. We're also grateful for being here. So most of the time you won't leave the interview day being like, I don't know what I should do. It's usually pretty clear cut from my experience. Alrighty, so that was the end of the kind of quick and dirty questions that were submitted ahead of time. So now I'll turn the floor back over to Dimitri.
So for the next few minutes, so we're going to split into breakout rooms. So we have different rooms based on specialties. So you could ask even additional questions. So if you're doing internal medicine, family medicine, emergency medicine, radiation oncology, pathology, we have different rooms available, and we could take specific questions as well for that specialty. So Alenta, would you like to say something about the breakout rooms?
Sure, yes. So we'll essentially open the breakout rooms that Dimitri just mentioned. And you can actually choose which breakout room you want to go into. So it will allow you to go into it. If you have any questions, there's be several of us here in the lobby, so you can always ask us or chat with us. But we'll open in a couple of minutes. I know there was a question submitted in the chat to everyone, and I wondered if the residents would want to respond to that one question about personal statements before we break out.
All right. Let me see.
I don't think it's necessary that you talk about that in your personal statement. Your personal unless you really feel strongly, if there's something that has changed your life or you feel really passionate about, and that's the reason for you had a bad score, then maybe you should. But I think your personal statement is more so for you to reflect and tell why you're going into that specialty or something like that. But they're going to probably ask you during your interview, and just be prepared to talk about why at that point. But I don't think that I would necessarily talk about it in your personal statement.
And to answer the other question in the chat about couple matching, I did not go couple matching, but from talking to my friends who have, two ways you can address this. If there are multiple hospitals, multiple programs, and you think that asking the program that you're interviewing at to grant an interview for your spouse, then you can just mention it that, hey, I'm applying for the specialty, my spouse is applying for this specialty. Is that something that you communicate with the other program to put in a word that we're couple matching? It's not a bad question. And if the program does not do that, they'll just say no. From what I'm told, it does not hurt your chances of the person actually matched at that place where she specifically asked this question. Now, be careful if you're interviewing at a program and that's the only hospital in town, and the closest hospital is 2-3 hours away, and your spouse's specialty is not in that hospital, because if you bring it up, chances are you're not actually going to match there. So that's something that may negatively affect you. But other than that, if you and their spouse are applying for the same specialty, I think it's free game to ask. If your spouse is applying to a specialty in that same hospital, I think it's also okay to ask. For my prelim interviews I'm not going to tell you where exactly, but there's one program who is in the same town I interviewed for the prelim, and I said, hey, I'm applying to radiation oncology for that program. It would be fantastic if if I match here, then it'll be one place. And I feel like it's the same way if you're talking about a spouse as well. You say, hey, if my spouse either interviewed here already or is going to interview at that place, it would be fantastic if we both could match together because we're couple matching. It just shows that you have more stakes or more interest in that program. Sorry for the long answer.